What we want to do tonight is to explore all of human history as we know it so far from a more mystical, Kabbalistic, Talmudical, Torah lens. Can we organize all of history? So the year is 5784, so we've had almost 6,000 years of this particular round of civilization. And can we summarize all of that based on one framework and try to understand it from a spiritual perspective? Why do things happen when they happen? Why did certain events occur when they occurred? Why did the Renaissance happen when it happened? Why were there, let's say, Dark Ages? Can we explain the major phases of human history from a spiritual perspective? So how do we understand the course of history up to the present and the future? Where are we heading in the coming centuries? What's to come? And we want to start with a passage that appears in a couple of places in the Gemara. So I'm quoting from Sanhedrin. Amar Rav Katina, Shit alfei shanei havu alma bechad charuv. So Rav Katina taught that the world will exist as we know it for 6,000 years. And then it'll have 1,000 years, charuv, which literally seems to mean destroyed. But then it goes on to clarify, Kshem shvi'it meshametet shana achat lezayin shanim, kach haolam meshamet 1,000 shanim leshivat alafim shana. So just as we have a sabbatical year and a Sabbath day, so in a week you have 6 days, and then you have Shabbat as a day of rest, and then you have a sabbatical year, you have 6 years of work, and then a 7th year of rest, so too does the whole course of history have 6,000 years of civilization as we know it, and then 1,000 years of a Sabbath, a great cosmic Sabbath, 1,000 years of rest. So we're going to have to define exactly what does that mean to have a Shabbat for 1,000 years. But that's the statement. So you have 6,000 years of the world as we know it, and then a 7th millennium, the great Shabbat, the cosmic Sabbath. Now, where did we get that from? Where did the Talmud get this idea? It appears in a few places, not just here. It's in the Midrash. It's mentioned in many places. A very well-known fundamental idea in Judaism. Where does it come from? Because everything has to have a source in Scripture, in Tanakh, in the Torah. Right? Everything that the Gemara says, everything in the Talmud, everything in the Zohar has to come in some way from the Torah. Right? They didn't just make it up.
The creation of the word,
Bereshit. Exactly. So right from Bereshit, right from the creation of the world, right from the very first verse in the Torah. Because the first verse in the Torah we know is Bereshit, bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, right? And if you count how many letters, Aleph, the letter Aleph, how many times does it appear in that first verse? Bereshit has an Aleph, right? Bara has an Aleph. God's name has an Aleph. Et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So you have altogether 6 Alephs. And so from that we learn that the letter Aleph literally means 1,000, right? Aleph is an Elef. Elef is 1,000. So in the Hebrew numerical system, the letters go Aleph to Yud is 1 to 10, and then Kaf to Kuf is 20 to 100, and then Reish is 200, and Shin is 300, Taf is 400. Then you have 5 more symbols. Kaf Sofit is 500, Mem Sofit is 600, all the way to Tzadi Sofit is 900, and then you're back at Aleph, which is 1,000. So that's how the numerical system works. You have 27 symbols. You actually need 27 symbols to create that numerical system. Actually, ancient Greek had that too. There were 27 letters in ancient Greek, because to create that, you can have every number from 1 to 1,000, and then you can just repeat them over and over again. So in Gematria, you go from Aleph to Tzadi Sofit is 1 to 900, and then 1,000 is the Aleph again. Aleph literally means 1,000. So encoded into the first verse of the Torah is 6 letters Aleph, is a hint to 6,000 years of the world's creation, of the world's existence. That history will run as we know it for 6,000 years. Okay. Make sense? And of course, it's actually found in many other allusions. The word Bereshit itself, Bereshit, if you split it, is bara shit, which means that God created 6. Shit means 6 in Aramaic. So and even other sources say the word Bereshit itself has 6 letters. So it's like in the first word of the Torah, God already encoded all of 6,000 years of human history in those 6 letters. So the 6 letters of Bereshit correspond to the 6,000 years of human history. And the 6 alephs also correspond to those 6,000 years of history. So it's all tied to the first verse and even to the first word of the Torah. And then, of course, those correspond to the 6 days of creation. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 correspond to the 6 millennia, which is what we want to get to. So we have 6,000 years of time that God created for our civilization, and and another place in the Talmud, interestingly enough, also says, Amar Rava Shita Alfei Parse Have Alma, that God also made the world 6,000 parsas large. So the Talmud says something pretty amazing. 1,500 plus years ago, Rava says that we have a tradition that God made the world 6,000 parsas. Now, what's a parsa? A parasang, a parsa, is the distance that it takes a person to walk 72 minutes. So how far is that? How much can you walk in 72 minutes? So some people round it down to just 5 kilometers, but it's more like 6 or 7 kilometers, right? Typically you walk 5 kilometers an hour. So if you do the math, it's about 6.5 kilometers is a parsa. So do the math, you get about 40,000 kilometers. Which is amazing because that's precisely that we know today. And amazingly enough, 1,500 years ago already, the Talmud has a teaching that the world stretches for 6,000 parsas, which is just about 40,000 kilometers, which is really amazing, right? This is long before Columbus and before anybody had circumnavigated the globe. And there's a really precise calculation for the size of the earth already. That's in Masechet Pesachim. And it actually continues. And it says that sumcha dirkia alpa parse, that the rakia, that like the firmament above, I guess the atmosphere, is 1,000 parsas. Right? So about 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers. But then it says this, that the first point, chada gemara, that the first point is like a legitimate tradition, no doubt. But the second one, chada svara, the second one was just Rava's reasoning. That was his opinion. So it's not necessarily a fact. The first thing he's saying is a scientific fact. He's guaranteeing for you. And today we know that that's quite true. And the second thing, the length of the atmosphere or the height of the atmosphere, well, we're not so sure, but we have a svara. Rava gives a svara, a reasoning that it's 1,000 parsas. So when you think about it today, what do we consider? How far does the atmosphere extend? How far do you think the atmosphere extends? Any ideas? No?
To the sheath of the sun.
So, yeah, it's a lot more than people think. Because, the atmosphere has many layers. So there's the troposphere and the mesosphere, right? The stratosphere, the thermosphere. So the exosphere actually extends very far. Some people say that it extends, halfway to the moon. But it's certainly several tens of thousands of kilometers. It stretches quite far, the atmosphere. It gets thinner and thinner, but you can still detect a little bit of atmosphere, even 10,000 kilometers up. So even on this, Rava was quite accurate, that the atmosphere stretches much higher than we think. It's many thousands of kilometers up. But that's another amazing thing. So we find something really cool here, that God gave us 6,000 years of time, and also on planet Earth, 6,000 kilometer parsas of space. And so the 6 days of creation allude to the 6 millennia of time. And so we can actually see parallels. If we go through history, we can see parallels that the first millennium of history is very much similar to what happened on the first day of creation. And the second day of creation parallels what happened in the second millennium, and third, and so on, up to the present. And at the same time, we know that the 7 days of creation also correspond to the 7 lower sfirot. We have 10 sfirot. You remember the sfirot, the tree? There's 10 divine energies that God imbued into the cosmos in creation, and they're divided up into 3 and 7. So the top 3 are called the mochin, right? The intellectual faculties, the more mental faculties, the higher faculties, and the lower 7 are called the midot. They're more like character traits, more associated more with the heart, and whereas the top 3 are associated more with the brain. So the physical world is always paralleled to the 7 lower sfirot, and the higher worlds, the heavens, tend to correspond to the 3 higher sfirot, the mochin. So Keter, Chochma, and Bina, or Chochma, Bina, and Dat, which is where Chabad comes from, corresponds to, those are the mochin, those are the higher sfirot, and then the lower 7, from Chesed, right, goes Chesed, which is kindness, and Gvura, which is restraint and judgment, and Tiferet, which is balance and beauty, and then Netzach, which is victory and eternity, and Hod, which is splendor and acknowledgement, gratitude, and Yesod, which literally means foundation, but corresponds to all things related to intimacy and things like that, and then Malchut, which is called kingdom. And so those 7 qualities, we talked about this before. You can listen to a recap from the past that we talked about the different sfirot. So you have 7 lower sfirot from Chesed to Malchut, which correspond to the 7 days of the week. And this is the 7 days of creation. And really to all things 7 in this lower world, those 7 are manifest pretty much everywhere. You'll notice patterns of 7. And when you think about sight, the visual sense, we can discern on a rainbow 7 distinct colors. Right? The color spectrum is divided up into red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Right? The color spectrum, there are 7 distinct colors in the color spectrum, and then all the things in between.
And music notes.
Exactly, so that's what I was getting. So visually, we have 7 colors that correspond to the 7 sfirot. In the hearing sense, same thing, right? Music, we have 7 clear, discernible notes from, I guess, if the Western system is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and the European system is Do, Re, Mi, and so on. So you have 7 distinct notes, and again, all the things in between, the sounds in between, but there's 7 distinct notes. And in vision, there's 7 distinct colors, and there's 7 days of the week. And then even in the earth, we divide up into 7 continents, 7 key major land masses. So you see these patterns of 7 all over the place, right? Like your face has 7 orifices, right? Your 2 eyes and your 2 nostrils and your 2 ears and your mouth. And so all over, you see the patterns of 7 all over the place. Right? Also, your whole body, right? You have a head, and you have 2 arms and the 2 legs, and you have a body, and you have a reproductive organ. So there's like all these patterns of 7 everywhere. So in the lower world, God created everything in patterns of 7. Okay, so we want to parallel, and those parallel the 7 sfirot. So we want to look at all of 6,000 years of history, 7,000 years, including the future millennium. We want to look at 7,000 years, how that corresponds to the 7 days of creation, and also how that corresponds to the 7 sfirot. So we're also going to parallel it to that. What is the relationship between Chesed and the first day and the first millennium, and Gvura and the second day and the second millennium? So that's what we want to do. And finally, we want to add one more thing to this framework. So you're going to have to keep 3 things in mind simultaneously. Okay? So the third thing is, the same Gemara in Sanhedrin continues and says, Tana deve Eliyahu, it was taught in the school of Eliyahu, Sheshet alafim shana have alma. So we know that the world as we know it exists for 6,000 years. Shnei alafim tohu, the first 2,000 years are 2,000 years of tohu, which literally means chaos. And then Shnei alafim Torah, the next 2,000 years are the 2,000 years of Torah. Shnei alafim yamot Mashiach, and the final 2,000 years of Mashiach. So the school of Eliyahu splits up 6,000 years of the world's history, 2,000 years of chaos, 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of Mashiach. Now, what does that mean? That's actually quite puzzling. What does that mean? That just the middle 2,000 is Torah? Well, what about now? We're not in the time of Torah? Are we now in the time of Mashiach? What does that mean that 2,000 years, are the Christians right here? What's going on? Right? Like the last 1,700 years, we're in the time of Mashiach? What's going on? So that's a very puzzling statement. So we need to explore, what did they really mean by this? What did Eliyahu mean when he said that we have 2,000 years of Tohu, 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of Mashiach? So those 3 things you have to keep in mind. The days of creation, the 7 days of creation, the 7 sfirot, and then this grouping of 2,000, 2,000, and 2,000. Okay, so let's do it. Are we ready to plunge into this? So we're going to go with day 1. What was created on day 1? light. So the first thing that we see, of course, that God said, the first thing that God said, really, according to the Pirkei Avot tells us, Be'asara ma'amarot nivra ha'olam, that God created the cosmos with 10 utterances. God spoke 10 times in the account of creation. And the first act was actually Bereshit itself, that God created a whole concept of time and place, space, and all of that. And then you have that on the same day, on the first day, God said, let there be light, right? Yehi o. So the first thing that God created was light. But we can derive that God created more things on the first day. So the Gemara says in Masechet Chagiga that God created 10 things altogether. What are the 10 things that he created on the first day? If you read like from the beginning of the passage, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So right away you have shamayim and aretz. So he created the heavens and the earth. And then it says va'aretz hayta tohu vavohu. So you have something called tohu and you have something called vohu. So we have to define what does that mean. That's two more things. And then God said, let there be light. And he separated from the light and the darkness. So there's or, there's light, and there's choshech, darkness. So that's two more things. And then it says that God, there was water, right? And there was the Spirit of God hovered over the face. Ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. So that means that there was something called ruach, there was some kind of spirit, and there was mayim. There must have been water also. And finally, God said that he made the light day and the dark night, so there was also day and night. So the Gemara gives us a list of 10 things that were created on day one: heaven and earth, tohu and vohu, light and dark, the spirit and the water, and day and light and darkness, wind and water, and then day and night. Okay. Yeah, so 10 altogether. Did I say it? Yeah, and heaven and earth. So 10 things were really created on the first day. But the main thing was light. And another thing to remember is also communication. God created the divine Hebrew alphabet, really. Although there are midrashim that say that God created the alphabet even before creation, maybe thousands of years before creation, whatever that means. The first thing that God really created was the alphabet, essentially, an ability, the whole structure of communication. Because if he spoke the world into existence, there had to have also been something to speak, right? First. So the divine alphabet, Hebrew, and so the Lashon HaKodesh came first. So all these things. And then, what's that?
Was there sound?
And sound, sure. So there is an idea that parallels to string theory, because in quantum physics right now, there's this idea that everything emerges from a set of vibrating strings. And there happens to be 10, right? In string theory, there are 10 dimensions, 10 strings that give rise to the whole cosmos. So some would say, and we talked about this before in Kabbalah and quantum physics, that string theory, that when the Torah says that God spoke the world into existence, that everything comes from vibrations. And science today also proposes that everything comes into existence through a set of vibrating strings. So it could be the same thing, right? Definitely those sight, sound, all these things were created on day one. And so that's going to correspond to, in the array of sfirot, the first one is chesed, right? Chesed, which is kindness. Chesed is positive energy. Chesed is light, right? Chesed is doing something positive for somebody else, enlightening somebody else, spreading whatever. It's associated with love and positivity and kindness and graciousness and all of that stuff. And we see, if we parallel that now to what happened in the first 1,000 years of civilization, right? What do we see in those first 1,000 years? So we have Adam and Eve, and they have a whole world before them. And it's basically free for them to explore and settle, right? God gave them a command to go out there and do it, and settle the world and do what you want. And there's unlimited space and resources. And we see chesed in the first millennium is imbued with the quality of chesed right from the beginning, because Adam and Eve commit this mistake of eating this forbidden fruit. And God said, when you eat from this fruit, you will die. But did they die when they ate from the fruit? They didn't. So right away, you see an act of chesed from God, that he actually gave them a millennium to live. He gave them 1,000 years to live. So that first 1,000 years is entirely indicative of God's chesed. He gave Adam and Eve 1,000 years, even though he said you would die on that day. He gave them 1,000 years. And we know that Adam didn't actually live 1,000 years. How long did he live? 930. What happened to the other 70? Where did the 70 go? Right, so we have a tradition that we know that King David lived exactly 70 years. He was born and passed away on Shavuot, And so there's a tradition that Adam gave King David 70 years. And there's a reason for that, because what does that mean, he gave King David 70 years? Why did he have to give King David 70 years?
He was an 8. He was 2 beyond. He needed 7 to ground him. He married Bat-Sheba.
That's very Kabbalistic. On a simple reason. Simpler. Very simple in that.
He's supposed to leave, right?
Yeah, so Adam foresaw. We know that God gave Adam a glimpse of all of history, and Adam foresaw that King David was meant to be a bar nafle, a miscarriage, that he wasn't going to be born. And so Adam gave him 70 years of his life, because he said, such a great soul, and it's not going to be born. He gave him 70 years of his life, so that King David lived exactly 70 years. And that term of bar nafle is also used in relation to Mashiach. And so there's a connection there between King David, obviously, and Mashiach being Mashiach ben David, and why Mashiach is called the miscarriage. Like, what does that mean? But I want to talk about that next time. Okay, that's going to be for the future, this idea of bar nafle, of a miscarriage. So Adam saw that David would be a miscarriage. And there is an interesting tradition, going back to the Arizal, that Adam, the name Adam is Aleph, Daled, Mem, right? Adam. Yeah, exactly. So the Arizal says that what is Adam? The Aleph in Adam stands for Adam himself, the first human. The Daled stands for David. And then the Mem is Mashiach, which is the first person, kind of the middle person, and the last person, so to speak, in history, in this whole period of 6,000 years, right? So Adam is Adam, David, Mashiach. And so you can also derive from that, Rav Yitzchak Ginsburg derives from that you can actually take this very literally and say, well, if Adam was the first man and David was the middle man, then if we take the chronology, the time from Adam to David, it should be roughly the same as the time from David to Mashiach, because the Arizal says that David is the midpoint of this whole story. So if you do the math, it works out to be that we are now mamash in the time of Mashiach, because we are now double the time that elapsed from Adam to David, we are now double that time. So we are definitely, based on at least that idea, in the time of Mashiach as well. So within Adam already, you have the first and middle and last person in these 6,000 years of civilization encoded within it. So the first, the feeling of the first, the energy that imbues the first millennium of human history is one of chesed, where Adam and Eve and the first people have the whole world before them, and it's just for them to take and enjoy, and they are given 1,000 years, even though they didn't deserve it. God gave them 1,000 years. Really, God said that on the day that you eat it, you will die on that day. And so, but a day for God, we know, like we read in Psalms, Elef shanim be'enecha keyom etmol, right? That 1,000 human years is for God like one day. So that's why when God said, you will die on that day, he didn't lie. I mean, he meant it. But my day, not your day. So that was the act of chesed. The chesed was that, you will get to live one divine day, which is 1,000 human years. You can then contrast that with day 2 and the second millennium of human history. Because day 2 in creation is the day when God split the waters and created the upper worlds and the lower worlds. And the tradition is that on that day, God also created hell and the sitra achra, various evil spirits and all of that. And that's why on the second day, it doesn't say that day was good. Right? On the first day, it says God saw and it was good. Kitov. The second day, it doesn't say that it was good. It was the only day that it doesn't say that it was good. So our sages explain, why was the second day not good? What was not good about the second day? I mean, some people today will say because it was Monday, and nobody likes Monday. Nobody likes waking up Monday morning and going to work. So Monday was not a good day. But why is it not on the second day of creation that Monday was not a good day? Because on that day, God created the whole concept of division, of separation. God separated the heavens and the earth. Until then, they were kind of connected almost, and then God split them apart and created a divide and almost like hid his presence and created a Gehenom and created evil spirits to counteract the good spirits. And that's all for the purposes really of us to have free will and to have purpose and to have growth. And so God had to create negative energy. And of course in the Sfirot, the second of the Sfirot is Gvura. Gvura means restraint. Gvura is also called Din. Din is judgment, right? So the second day is when God brought judgment and restraint and severity and negativity into the world. So the first day and the first millennium is all very positive, and it's chesed and kindness and love. But the second day is the opposite. It's severity and restraint and fear and judgment and punishment. And so when you look at the second millennium of history, that's when there's enough people on the planet already that they start dividing themselves, and they start fighting with each other and killing each other, and the world starts to become very sinful. And then God has to decree the flood. The flood happened in the second millennium. So in the Jewish chronology, the flood happened in the year 1656. So the second millennium is where we see God mamash showing us din, right? Like a great judgment on the world. The first big judgment on the world to reset really all of civilization again. So that happened in the second millennium. And then also the next major story, the next major judgment is Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel, same thing. That also happened right at the end of the second millennium. So in our chronology, that happened in the year 1996. So right at the end of the second millennium was Migdal Bavel. So the two great judgments that God brought into the world were in the second millennium. And this was the millennium where there was a lot of fighting and violence and sin and division between mankind. And remember, we talked also about the fallen angels idea, the Nephilim. The Torah says that there were Nephilim at that time and various Irin, various angels that came down to the planet and went astray. So that all happened in this time, in this second millennium, which corresponds to Gvura and Din, and on the second day of creation, the separation of waters, and the day that was not good. So now we can see why it was not good, right? The second day of creation alludes to the second millennium of history, which was not good. So that was day 2. And that corresponds to, so these first two millennia, is what we were saying, the first 2,000 years of history, which is the era of tohu, the era of chaos. Right? So there's disorder in the world, entropy, there's no order. Things are just happening, whatever. Right? The first millennium was a millennium of chesed. Things were just kind of happening. It was free reign, do whatever. The second millennium was full of division, strife, war, conflict, punishment. So the first 2,000 years are tohu, are chaotic. There's no order. There's no law. There's no rules. So that's the first phase. Now we're going into the next phase, the 2,000 years of Torah. Day 3, remember in the Sfirot, the third of the Sfirot is Tiferet. Tiferet is the most important one. It's right in the middle. It's the only one that connects to all the others. And it's the one that balances everything. It represents balance. It's called, Tiferet means beauty, and it also means balance, like symmetry. Like we find something symmetrical, we find it beautiful, right? There's something beautiful about symmetry. We like symmetry, naturally. So Tiferet is all about balance. And really, the land of Israel is associated with Tiferet. The people of Israel are rooted in, various nations are rooted in different sfirot. Every individual is rooted in a different sphira. So the people of Israel generally are rooted in Tiferet. The Holy Land is rooted in Tiferet. Tiferet is the center of it, the center of attention, really. And it's kind of like the biggest of the sfirot and has the most power and light and so on. So the Arizal, the Zohar say there's like 365 lights that come out of Tiferet. Tiferet corresponds to the sun. And that's why spiritually, why does a year have 365 days? So we say, well, that's how long it takes the earth to go around the sun, whatever, 300. But why? Why didn't God make it 200 days? I don't know. Make it 300 days. So the Zohar and the Arizal say that there's actually 365 lights that emerge out of Tiferet, and the solar year, the 365 days, correspond to those 365 lights. Because everything in the physical world is just a reflection of higher dimensions in the spiritual world. So because in the spiritual world, Tiferet shines with 365 lights, in the physical world, that manifests itself as a year of 365 days, as 365 days of sunshine. The sun corresponds to Tiferet. Another one of the 7 things that we were talking about, 7 colors, 7 notes, 7 continents, 7 days, also the 7 luminaries in the sky. Because without a telescope, when you look up into the night sky, there were 7 visible luminaries throughout history. Right? You see the sun and the moon, and then you have Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Right? Those were the 7 luminaries throughout history. The other things were only discovered recently, in recent centuries, with the invention of the telescope. So those 7 luminaries also correspond to the 7 sfirot, and to the 7 days, and to the 7 millennia. It all goes to, all these 7s parallel each other. So the sun corresponds to Tiferet. The moon corresponds to Malchut, which reflects the sun. So that's Tiferet. So Tiferet is like the biggest one, and the one that has all this light. And so it's also called, Tiferet is also called Emet. So each one of the sfirot has other names for. So Chesed is also called Gedula, and Gvura is also called Din, and Tiferet is often called Emet, truth. So what do we see here? What do we see on day 3? Day 3, we see the start of the era of Torah. In the year 2000, in the Hebrew chronology, 2000 is the start of the era of Torah. What happened in the year 2000? That's when Abraham emerged onto the scene. Abraham was born in the year 1948 of the Hebrew chronology, which is, of course, amazing because in modern times, the state of Israel was born in the year 1948 of the secular count of the, or I shouldn't say secular, it's really the Christian calendar, but 1948 CE for the state of Israel, and 1948 AM, Anno Mundi, on the Hebrew chronology is when Avraham was born. So there is a really interesting connection there. So Avraham was born in 1948. In the year 2000, he was 52 years old. According to tradition, that's when he was confronted by the king Nimrod and threatened to be thrown into a furnace. And he was saved by God from the furnace, and he started to go out there and do his work and make souls, like the Torah says, and start his real work, and teaching and education. So the light begins in the year 2000. That's when Torah starts, Until he was 52, Abraham reasoned that there must be one God and fought against idolatry, but he didn't have necessarily proof yet. He had never spoken to God. We say that Abraham chose God first, before God chose Abraham. Abraham just reasoned logically that there must be one God. And only when he was 52, God revealed himself and said, yeah, you were right. Here I am. This is the God that you were always. And since then, Abraham was a prophet from age 52, and he was going out there and teaching. And this is the beginning of Torah. That's why the age of Torah begins in the year 2000, because that's when Abraham started to teach Torah. And which Torah was he teaching? It wasn't a written Torah, but there was an oral Torah. Right? We know there was an oral tradition. That's something that people fail to understand. Some people always debate, is there an oral Torah? Who said there's an oral Torah? For sure there's an oral Torah, because Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, what Torah did they have? Abraham was commanded to circumcise himself. That's a mitzvah in the Torah. Did he have it in written form? No. Right? Abraham received an oral teaching. Abraham had an oral Torah from God. So actually the oral Torah preceded the written Torah. And that's obvious because Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., they were already circumcising themselves and following various laws and bringing offerings and things. And they didn't have it written in any text, which means that their Torah was an oral Torah. So the oral Torah actually precedes the written Torah. So that began in the year 2000. That starts the era of Torah and bringing that light back into the world. So that light of Tiferet is now starting to emerge. And remember, Tiferet is truth. So now we have Emet, we have the truth of Torah. All of that is starting to emerge with Abraham. And on the days of creation, the third day was the day that was doubly good. Right? The second day was not good, but on the third day, it says that God said it was good twice. So Tuesday is like the best day of the week, apparently. So Tuesday is doubly good. And Tuesday is when, on the third day of creation, God said twice that it's good. And that corresponds to the third millennium when Torah was emerging for the first time. And in the whole third millennium is where we have, all of our forefathers and Moses and the prophets. The Sinai revelation, the Exodus was in the year 2448. And that's the same year when the Sinai revelation occurred. So the Torah in written form began in 2448, and much of the story of the Tanakh was all in the third millennium, right? So, and then it was compiled in the fourth millennium. So if you look at the 2,000 years of Torah, the beginning and end, it begins with Abraham, and then we have the whole period of Tanakh, and then the Tanakh was compiled according to Jewish tradition in the year 3406. By the Anshe Knesset Agdolah, by the Great Assembly. And then the Mishnah was put together by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi in the year 3940. And then 40 years later, the students of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rav and Shmuel, went to Babylon, and the Babylonian Talmud tradition begins there. Right? So by the year 4000, you have the whole Tanakh, you have the Mishnah, and you have the beginning of the Gemara. And so from the year 2000 to 4000, you have like the whole set of Jewish teachings are kind of codified and laid down from the Torah and all the way to the Mishnah and the beginnings of the Gemara. So that's the 2,000 years of Torah that the school of Eliyahu was talking about. And that's the whole period. So the third millennium is the millennium of Abraham, of Moses, of the Sinai revelation, of all of that, the settling the land. King David is at the very end of that third millennium. So that's the third. And on the third day, of course, is not only when it was twice good, but that's when God created the earth itself. Right? He gathered the waters, created the earth, put all the fruits and vegetation, and all of that stuff came out. So it's all about fruitfulness and yields and land. You have the creation of the land on the third day and the giving of the Holy Land, the covenant with Israel for the Holy Land in the third millennium, that Israel settles in its promised land for the first time. And Abraham makes a covenant based on the land. So there's that land connection as well. The third day being about land and about fruit, and the third sphira and emet and light and all that together. So that's the third millennium. All of these things happened then, including King David and Jerusalem and the establishment of the Davidic dynasty. Moving along. So day 4. We have now what was created on day 4? Sun. So the luminaries were put into their positions. We have an understanding that really the sun and moon and the cosmos was created on the first day, but they were set into their exact orbits and into their positions on the fourth day, and particularly the sun and the moon. And the Torah says over there on the fourth day that why did God make a sun and moon and stars and constellations? Specifically for us to be able to keep track of time and to have holidays. So God says that you will have mo'adim, so you will have you'll have a calendar. You'll be able to keep track of a calendar and have holidays. How does that relate? How does the fourth day being about timekeeping and calendars and holidays, it's really like for religious meaning. God put the constellations there, not just to light up the sky, but we derive spiritual meaning from those things. Like in astrology. Right, there is a place for astrology as well if it's done right, not for fortune telling, but for just spiritually understanding various higher realities. Right, so the luminaries and the constellations and the sun and the moon play a really important role in basically all religions and in various spiritual phenomena. So what you find then in the fourth millennium, what do you see in the fourth millennium? Fourth millennium, you really see the rise of of major religions around the world. It's a very religious era, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's Confucius, whether it's Tao, whether it's even, we talked about Judaism starts to form as an organized religion. We talked about that last time, that really in Bavel, Judaism shifts from being specifically just like a nation state associated with the land of Israel to something much more universal. We talked about that before, right? Once Israel was detached from the land and forced to go into exile, Judaism had to adapt and become more universal, right? And no longer be so focused on the temple and on the land, because in Babylon, we didn't have the temple and the Holy Land. So even Judaism as we know it begins to form. We talked about that last time, right? Before then, it wasn't called Judaism because Abraham was not a Judean. It wasn't related, right? So all the major religions really emerge at this time. Zoroastrianism becomes a big deal. Hinduism, I know we gave a class about Hinduism, and if you look at the YouTube comments, so many of the Hindus got so offended because they feel like their religion is tens of thousands of years old. Okay, that's great. Everybody thinks that their religion is the first one and the oldest one and whatever. But the reality is, if we look at the actual historical record, basically all religions emerge here, like organized religions. Yes, religions are based on older ideas, for sure. They're all, they go back to the first people, right? It goes back to Adam. But the organized religions, including Hinduism, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, basically every religion emerges in the fourth, the ancient religions, begin to emerge in the fourth millennium. Also the calendars. All the major calendars are set. The Babylonian calendar, the Greek calendar, the Julian calendar. All these things emerge in the fourth millennium. So just like on the fourth day, God said, I'm going to put luminaries and constellations and stars for you to have religious gatherings and events and to be able to keep track of time and have calendars. In the fourth millennium, we see precisely that. We see all over the world religions, organized religions forming, calendars being developed to keep precise track of time and holidays and all this stuff. It's pretty amazing. And also, the theme of the fourth millennium is when you think about the major luminary was the sun. And in the fourth millennium, you have a lot of solar sun worship all over the world. The biggest religions in the early Roman Empire before Christianity was the worship of Mithras and Sol Invictus. Right? Sol Invictus is the sun, the eternal sun. So sun worship was widespread during this time throughout the world. But that's day 4, and it corresponds in the Sfirot to Netzach. Netzach literally means eternity. Netzach is associated with the stars and the heavens and the eternal kind of vast cosmos. So there's that connection to Netzach and the stars and religion and astrology and calendars and timekeeping. That's day 4. Then we have day 5. What happened on day 5? So day 4 ends in the year 240. Okay? What happened, and now we're in day 5, which the 5th millennium is 240 to 1240. But what happened in day 5 in creation? Fish, yeah, so fish and birds. Right? And then on the 6th day was the land animals. But on day 5, very strange, fish and birds. So the seas and the skies are populated. And then the fish and birds are also given a blessing to be, that's the first time in the Torah where God gives a blessing. So the 5th day also has a concept of blessing there, and the fish and the birds are given a blessing to spread very far and wide, right, and go all over the world. So they're given this blessing to be fruitful, to multiply, and so on. And what do we see? The theme of the 5th millennium parallels this actually very neatly. Because what is the major theme of the 5th millennium? From the year 240 to 1240, what do we see? Yeah, exactly. We see the rise of the 2 largest movements on the planet, religions and movements on the planet, which is Christianity and Islam. The 5th millennium is dominated by Christianity and Islam. And if you think about that, what is the symbol of Christianity that people still put on their bumper stickers? It's actually not just a cross, but it's a fish. Right? The original symbol of Christianity was a fish. Even before the cross, in some ways, when the Christians were being persecuted by the Romans, the fish was a symbol, secretly was a sign of being a Christian, was you put a fish. And that's why to this day you have the bumper sticker of the fish. Where does it come from? Because the initials in Greek of Jesus, his name and his title, spell ichthyios in Greek, which is fish. So fish was a code word for Jesus. And so the fish was really the original symbol of Christianity. And there is an astronomical, since we're already talking about astronomy and astrology, there is an astronomical tie in there. Because if you remember, a couple of years ago, we talked about astronomy and astrology, and the zodiac actually goes through a 26,000-year cycle. And each of the zodiac signs rules for 2,000 years. It's the procession of the equinoxes. And so right now, for the past almost 2,000 years, we've been in the age of Pisces. So right when Christianity emerges, the cosmos shifts in such a way that we're in the age of fish, of Pisces. Before that was the age of Aries. Aries is the ram, right? So some people see in that, the ram is more like a symbol of Judaism, and the ram's horn and the shofar, and then Pisces is like the dominance of Christianity and the fish. And now we're transitioning, according to many astrologers, we're actually out of the age of Pisces, and we're transitioning into the Messianic Age, which is the age of Aquarius. And I'll come back to that later on. So there's also a connection there to the rise of Christianity, symbolized by the fish of the 5th day, and the start of the 5th day being also cosmically a transition into the era of Pisces. But Christianity, in any case, was symbolized by a fish. Islam is actually very often symbolized by birds. Islam is not, they don't depict anything living, but like in Arabic calligraphy, they'll write in the shape of a bird, in the rough outlines of like a bird. And birds in Islam are considered something very lofty and creature that's close to God and so on. So birds in Islam have a very positive association and very important symbolism, the connection between birds and Islam. And various Muslim rulers like Saladin even had their like an eagle on their flag or whatever it was, or were symbolized by an eagle. Islam is often symbolized by a bird. Christianity for sure is symbolized by a fish. And so I believe that the whole idea of the fifth day being the birds and the fish or the fish and the birds, more accurately, is symbolic of the rise of Christianity and Islam, which were also blessed. The birds and the fish were given a blessing on the fifth day to spread across the whole world and to spread very quickly and populate the planet. And we see that precisely that's what happened with Christianity and Islam, which are the two most, in some ways, successful religions and have the most adherents. Christianity and Islam, number 1 and 2, in terms of having billions of followers and spreading around the entire world. And, Kabbalistically, we've talked about this before, there are 70 root nations, and we say that 35 belong to Esav, that are dominated by the Christian world, and 35 belong to Ishmael and are dominated by the Muslim world on the planet. And then there's Israel as like the 71st nation, all a sheep among 70 wolves. So that's the 5th millennium and the 5th day. And so this is also the time where we are in the era of, according to Tana de Eliyahu, of Mashiach. What is the connection there? This is something that needs to be understood. Because what does that mean? The era of Mashiach starts in the year 240, according to this teaching of Beit Eliyahu. How did that happen? What does that mean? And what does Islam have to do with this? What is this idea of Mashiach? If you think about it, Christianity is obviously a Messianic movement. It's all centered around Jesus. But the truth is that Islam is also a Messianic movement. Because if you look at Muslim literature, the Quran, the Hadith, Muhammad is styled himself as the Redeemer of the Jews. He is described in Muslim texts as the long-awaited Redeemer of the Jews, that final prophet that the Jews are waiting for, presumably. So Muhammad didn't claim to be Mashiach. He didn't claim to be the Messiah per se, but he did claim to be the Redeemer, like a Goel, which is a little confused in Islam, because Islam believes that Jesus was the Messiah. See, Islam agrees that Jesus was the Messiah. They call him Al-Masih, that Jesus was the Messiah. Both Christians and Muslims believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Muslims believe Jesus was the Messiah. They also believe that Muhammad was the Redeemer that the Jews are waiting for. So Muhammad also styles himself as the Goel, as the Redeemer of the Jews. And also Islam has a Mahdi, right? The Mahdi that's going to come at the end of days and fight in the war of Gog Magog, which they call Juju Majuj. Right? So, because the Gimel is a Ja. So Islam has a very confused understanding of Mashiach, because on the one hand, they agree with Christians that Jesus was the Messiah. On the other hand, they say that also Muhammad has a Messiah-like aspect, and then they also have a future Mahdi, which is strange, because why do you need all three? If you're going to say that Jesus is the Messiah, then that's it. You don't need anybody else after the Messiah, right? So what point is there to have Muhammad if Jesus was the Messiah? We don't need another one, right? The Messiah is supposed to usher in the final Messianic age, so that doesn't make sense. And then if Muhammad was the Messiah, then why do you need another Mahdi? Right? In Scripture, in the Tanakh, all the prophecies about Mashiach, it's like it goes together. Gog and Magog is when Mashiach will come. So you don't need Jesus and Muhammad and a Mahdi. So Islam has like a very confused understanding of exactly what the Messiah is supposed to be. So it's like Jesus was the Messiah, but also Muhammad kind of brought the final revelation, right? And then there's also going to be another Mahdi. Like, it doesn't make sense. But the point is that Christianity is a Messianic movement, but so is Islam is a Messianic movement. And so you find that in this millennium, from 240 to 1240, you have two massive Messianic movements, and they spread very rapidly, because this is the thing, that there's this little paradox of these Messianic movements. And it continues for this entire 2,000-year period. Remember, Tana de Eliyahu says that the final 2,000 years is the Yamot HaMashiach. What does that mean? Clearly, Mashiach hasn't come. And when the Gemara was first published, that time period had passed. So like the people, Rav Ashi and whoever, Ravina, who put together the Talmud, They were already in the time of Mashiach. So why would they publish it saying we're in the time of Mashiach? That means they obviously meant something else. What they mean is that we are now in a stage where everybody thinks that they're Mashiach. And there's these mass movements, messianic movements. Christianity was one, Islam was another, and there's many others in between, Shabtai Tzvi, and many more. And even to this day, Lehavdil with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and there's all these mass messianic movements happening. And there's something really paradoxical about these messianic movements. They're all hugely successful. Christianity was really successful. Islam was really successful. Shabbateanism was really successful. Right? In the 1600s, it was huge. And now even, again, with the Lubavitch movement, Chabad is hugely successful. Chabad is the most successful Jewish organization of all time. Why? And this is the paradox of every messianic movement, that the person who starts this movement is so wise and charismatic and so full of what is really the fifth day, the fifth sfirah of Hod, of majesty and splendor, that they inspire so many people. And although these people are all trying to get everybody to focus their attention on God, what ends up happening is that their followers end up focusing their attention on the guy, and that guy becomes the focus of all the attention. So it becomes a cult of personality, right? Jesus never intended for everybody to make him the center of worship. I mean, if you read what he was saying, he wanted everybody to connect to God. But instead, they're worshiping Jesus as God. Muhammad is a little bit of a different story, but same idea, that Muhammad wanted to get the Arabian Peninsula away from paganism and towards a purely monotheistic faith. But then Muhammad himself becomes the focus of attention. Right? And like the Quran, the Hadith is all about what he said. It's all about him and how great he is. And it's all about praising Muhammad all the time. Right? It's all about Muhammad. You can't, God forbid that you say anything critical of Muhammad. Right? It's all about he is the greatest. And the same problem is in every messianic movement. Shabtai Tzvi was the same. Shabtai Tzvi became later in the Shabbatean movement a godlike figure. And the same is happening now, unfortunately, with Lubavitch. And Lubavitchers turning the Rebbe, who was such a great figure, but now they're deifying him into this godlike, larger-than-life entity. So the paradox is that on the one hand, all these movements fail because they turn into cults of personality. But they succeed because the followers are so committed to their leader that they will do anything. They will go anywhere. They will martyr themselves, right? All these religions, Christianity, early history of Christianity is all martyrdom. People are willing to die for Jesus. Right? Same is true for the early history of Islam, where the Muslims were so committed. They will do anything. They will go to the ends of the world to spread their message. Same was true for the Shabbateans, who were willing to go anywhere and infiltrate. And right now, we see the same with Lubavitch, which is going to every corner of the planet. They're so committed. They will do anything because the Rebbe said so. Right? And so that's amazing. That's wonderful. For Judaism, it's a good thing. Because now you can go anywhere in the world and you have access to a Chabad house and kosher food and a minyan, and that's wonderful. But the point is, it can only work. Such success is only possible when you have a messianic element to it. Do you see the paradox? These movements are all successful because of the messianic element. But because they're messianic, they're all doomed to fail.
That's their purpose now.
Right. So that's why I think that Tana de Veliah was saying that these past 2,000 years, the main theme of them is messianic movements, one after the other, that spread very rapidly. This is what it means, Yamot HaMashiach. Everybody wants Mashiach to come. We all understand that there needs to be a Messiah, and people are tired of waiting, so they just jump the gun and say, okay, well, he's the Messiah, fine. Oh, he wasn't? Okay, this guy now is the Messiah. Like every era, every century or two, you have another new messianic movement. All right, so the theme of these last 2,000 years, that's what Tana de Veliah, I think, is really saying, is that people are yearning so badly for Mashiach, and you have these mass messianic movements, but each one has its purpose, and each one's blessed, like the fish and the birds. And that's what the Rambam, if you remember what the Rambam said about Christianity and Islam, it's important to read. Right? The Rambam said about Christianity and Islam is, why did they emerge? He says that God had a reason for bringing all these religions. There's a reason why these messianic movements exist. And the Rambam wrote really eloquently, he said that because what they were able to do is accelerate the process towards Mashiach. They were able to take fundamental principles of monotheism, scripture, God, mitzvot, positivity, kindness, charity, prayer, all that stuff. They were able to take all these good ideas and spread them, because the core ideas of all these religions are the same, and they're all spreading, the word of God, the understanding that there is one God, that we are aiming for a better world, that a Messiah will come. And the Rambam writes there, he says, now, thanks to Christianity and Islam, the whole world is familiar not just with monotheism and the divine word of God and these ideas, these good spiritual ideas, but the whole world is familiar with Mashiach, with the concept of a Messiah. And the Rambam says, when the real Messiah does come, everybody will recognize him, because everybody knows what a Messiah is and should be. So the Rambam says that they paved the way. And he quotes also from the Tanakh, from Tzefania, where he says that the whole world will very easily shift to a purer language, a safa brura, because they already have the key ideas, they just need a little refinement. So they paved the way for Mashiach to come. So I think that's all part of what this idea of being in the era of Mashiach means. The last 1700 years is a transition towards the Messianic Age. And there's all these Messianic movements that are false Messianic movements, but they have a positive purpose in spreading those key ideas all over the world so that Mashiach does come. That's day 5. What's day 6? So now the 6th millennium is from 1240 till now. We are still in the 6th millennium. What happened on day 6 in creation? Animals and humans. So on the one hand, the beasts, but then at the end, mankind, humanity, humans. So when you think about what's happened in the last 700 years, from the year 1240, what's happening now? 1240 is roughly the start of what historians would call roughly the beginning of the Renaissance, right? The end of the Dark Ages. Art and literature and philosophy and science starts to make a serious comeback. So it's the rise of man again, like the rise of new humanism. Humanity comes back. It's a rebirth. Renaissance literally means the rebirth of man, right? And the 6th day was the birth of man. So on the one hand, there is humanity taking a great leap forward and starting to, become what God always intended mankind to be, becoming enlightened and smarter and more creative and better, and technology, repairing the world, making the world a better place. On the other hand, we see the biggest conflicts in history and the biggest catastrophes in history happen in this time, whether it's the Holocaust, the World Wars, the 30 Years' War in the 1600s, like devastating catastrophes. So on the one hand, you have people who are behaving like beasts, like animals. On the other hand, we see the world progressing towards a new humanism. So there's that struggle between human behavior and beastly behavior in the theme of the 6th day of beast and man, and that little kind of dichotomy of or struggle between being beast and man. But this is the era of perfecting mankind, which is what's supposed to have been happening over the last few centuries, although the last couple of decades are quite worrisome. I don't know if we're perfecting mankind anymore. But that's all part of the final challenge, the final test at the end of days. Because on the Sfirot, the 6th of the Sfirot is Yesod. Yesod is at the bottom, right before Malchut, and everything pours into Yesod. So Yesod has the biggest burden, and Yesod has the most strain and the most stress. And from the Arizal and even before, Yesod was always considered the greatest test, because that's the domain of righteousness. Yesod is the tzaddik. We call Yosef a tzaddik because he is Yesod. And the real mark of righteousness is sexual purity. So Yesod is the entire domain of sexuality. And that's why today, the Arizal already said this a long time ago, the final test for mankind before Mashiach comes is all in the realm of sexuality. And that's why the world today is so crazy in this regard. All the stuff that's happening with all the LGBTQ and all the things, the immodest things that we see on the internet and the terrible things that are placed on the internet. And there's such confusion with regards to sexuality. Things that historically were so simple, like you're a boy or you're a girl. That's not clear anymore. There's such intense confusion, and it's all part of what the Arizal already prophesied. Says, you'll see, at the end of days, this will be the biggest challenge. Everything to do with sexuality. And that's the biggest test for mankind and for every human being. The real mark of being a tzaddik is your sexual purity, because those are really the biggest sins and the most grotesque sins, the ones that make us cringe, right? Those sins are the worst, right? If a person eats something not kosher, that's between them and God, whatever, that's his choice. But when you hear somebody commit a sexual crime, God forbid, like rape or something, whatever it is. It makes us all so angry, right? These things are so terrible, and it's such a violation of a person's privacy and a person's holiness. So Yesod is really the biggest test, and that's why it's the roadblock to Malchut. Malchut being the kingdom of heaven. That's the final test, which is why, the Arizal says this is the final test before mankind, is the test of Yesod. This is the real test of man, and what divides man from beast is Yesod. And that's really the theme of the last 700 years, and it's accelerated greatly in the past few decades. And of course, it ties into Adam and Eve, who were created on the sixth day, and we say that they consumed the forbidden fruit on the same day that they were created, on the sixth day. And today we're living that test as well, the forbidden fruit test. Because according, again, to the Arizal and various mystical sources, the forbidden fruit was really just a metaphor for sexual intimacy. Like, that's really what it means, that they consumed the fruit and saw that they were naked and they were ashamed. The shame that comes with sexual sin. There is such an interpretation. And so that's where we're in now, in the sixth day, and all the tests with the forbidden fruit that today is so easily accessible to anybody. We have all these, the world made sexual sin so easy. You can just get an app on your phone and you can do whatever, right? Anything and everything. So that is the test of our generation, the test of the sixth day, and the test of the sixth millennium. And now let's conclude with Shabbat, the cosmic Shabbat. What is that going to look like? We are now in this transition phase. If you remember, we said before, when we prepare for Shabbat, like halachically speaking, you're supposed to start desisting from work, from your day job, your 5-6 days a week job. You're supposed to start preparing for Shabbat 6 hours before, a quarter of the day, right? So 6 out of 24 hours. So 6 hours before Shabbat is when you're already supposed to, head home and start preparing for Shabbat.
So the last 250 years.
Exactly.
And we're going to have what?
Exactly. So we said, we've talked about this before, that if each day is 1,000 years, then, and if you split it into hours, then 6 hours, a quarter of a day, a quarter of a millennium is 250 years. Meaning from the year 5750, we have entered the time that we are preparing for the Sabbath. 5750. We're in 5784. Right? So 5750 was 34 years ago, right? 1989, 1990. And we've talked about that year before a few times because it was quite a monumental year for various reasons, like the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we talked about that in relation to the prophecies of the Third Rome, so the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. And many other interesting things happened in 1989, and one that I really want to connect to how is this going to look like, what does that have to do with 5750 and preparing for the cosmic Sabbath? Because the idea is that we're going to have 1,000 years of Shabbat. Now, Shabbat means you don't do any work. How is society going to survive or endure without anybody doing any work? How are you going to be able to live without, think of Shabbat, right? So do I have 1,000 years of Shabbat where I'm not going to turn on any lights, I'm not going to cook, I'm not going to drive, I'm not going to work? How is that possible to do continuously for 1,000 years?
What happens if the population of the world really decreases and we have so many...
Still, who grows your food? Who harvests your food?
We don't need it.
So that's one pessimistic view of it.
Non-Jewish people, maybe?
Maybe, but this is supposed to be a universal era. It's supposed to be a Shabbat for all of mankind, not just Jews. Remember, the seventh age, the Messianic Age is for everybody. Bayom ha'u yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad, for the whole world. The temple will be Beit Tfilah lechol ha'amim. The temple will be for everybody. So it's going to be a universal age, a Shabbat for the whole world. Now, since last year, we can see how this might happen, because what happened last year? ChatGPT, AI, suddenly this jumped onto the scene. And now it didn't start last year, but now we're starting to see how artificial intelligence is really taking over and doing things that are unbelievable. You can write your essays. I mean, I struggle with my students all the time because they have AI do all their essays and all their research papers. So now I tell my students, if you're going to use it, then cite it. Like in your work cited, cite ChatGPT and what exactly you used And the truth is, a student of mine sent me one thing, and then she said, I use ChatGPT. And I said, well, send me what you wrote before you put it into ChatGPT to rewrite it. And what she wrote was actually much better than what ChatGPT did. So I said, no, submit yours. It's much better than the AI version. But what's happening now is that people are using AI for everything. Right? It does all your work for you, even art. I've used it to make, background images on the YouTube videos it's beautiful. It makes really high quality, creative art. And AI will do everything. They have robot bartenders, they have robot doctors. They found that robot doctors are better at diagnosing things. AI physicians are more accurate in their diagnoses than human physicians. So AI is going to take over. China is now pushing AI teachers. They're using AI to custom tailor education to every student. That's something that a human teacher can't really do. There's not enough hours in a day for me to cater unique content for each of my 120 students. It's just not humanly possible, but AI can do it. So in China now they're investing heavily into AI education, where every student has their own custom tailored AI teacher. So AI is really taking over all jobs. Right? So if you ask somebody like Elon Musk, he's saying within decades, the AI can do everything. There's no need for humans to work anymore. And so I think some people take a pessimistic approach to it. I also do sometimes, because I see visions of Terminator, the opening scene of Terminator or The Matrix or any one of these AI apocalypse movies. But the truth is, I think AI could be a setup for the cosmic Shabbat. Because with AI, now we can see how nobody has to work anymore. Everything is done for you. AI can cook for you. They have AI bartenders on cruise ships now, it's robots that mix your drinks. So AI can cook your food and drive you all over the place. I think AI could be how we have a cosmic Shabbat where nobody has to work and AI takes care of everything. And then we can have a Shabbat and focus on spiritual things. We no longer have to worry about physical stuff. And what does that have to do with 5750? Well, if you think about what was the first spark in this whole AI thing, in 1989, which was 1989-90, which was 5750, Tim Berners-Lee proposed the World Wide Web in May of 1989. Right? And he had a working draft of it in 1990, and then it opened up to the whole world in August 1991. But in 1989-90 is when the World Wide Web was created, and that was the beginning of the digital age, of the information age, of connecting. The World Wide Web was really the first mass neural network in some ways, right? Connecting individual computers from all over the world and allowing everybody to communicate pretty much instantly from across the planet. It was the first real mass neural network. I know there were things before that. The internet existed before that, of course, but in terms of for everybody, commercially, residentially, for every human being to be able to interconnect globally, that was really the starting point. And it was just happened to be in 5750, in a way, just prophesized, that this would be the start of the preparation for the cosmic Shabbat. And it's interesting that in Hebrew, AI is bina melachutit, and the word is melacha. They dafka use the word melacha, which is, of course, precisely what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Right? Melachot are what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat, and artificial intelligence, I don't know who coined it, but it was genius, because it's bina, it's like an intelligence that's melacha, like a melachutit, that is going to allow us to avoid doing the melachot of Shabbat to have a cosmic Shabbat. So I find that also really interesting. So you see that already. 1989 is, in addition to the fall of the Soviet Union, Tiananmen Square in China, which then led to China opening up for better or for worse to the world, right? And so many other. The first GPS satellite also was launched in 1989. And the internet, and so many other interesting things that happened in that year. And I'll just tell you one more thing that happened in that year, and I'll end with that. Because in February 1989, there was an interesting paper, or the New York Times published something in February of 89, saying that in Qumran, remember Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls, the caves, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found? They found a jug of oil. And when they analyzed that oil, it's an oil that they couldn't identify. It was not olive oil, which is what they usually find, but it was something totally unique. And so the researchers proposed that this must be the farsamon, shemen farsamon, the anointing oil that used to be used to anoint kings and priests and Mashiach. Right? Mashiach is literally means the anointed one. Right? Mashiach means the anointed one. So we say that when Mashiach is going to come, Eliyahu also will return to anoint Mashiach with the shemen farsamon. And so interestingly enough, it just so happened that it was in 1989 that the jug of oil was discovered at the end of 88, but when scientists analyzed it, and chemists started to analyze it the following year, and the paper was published in 89, where they proposed that we finally have the long-lost farsamon oil that's been unknown for millennia since the temple was destroyed. Nobody knew what the identity of this oil is. It's not the farsamon that you eat today, the persimmons. That was named after, that farsamon. We're not sure what it is. It's some kind of, it's translated as balsam, whatever that means. Nobody really knows exactly, but it's a unique species that we don't have. So in any case, it was in 89 that they rediscovered it. So I think that that's just another sign that really was the year when the Kvot HaMashiach, the footsteps of the Messiah kind of begin for so many different reasons, whether it's the beginning of AI or the fall of the Soviet Union or the discovery of the anointing oil, the temple anointing oil. It was a small little jug. I think what you would need is, and this is where technology will come in, maybe AI, you have to figure out how to make more of it, right? So they're going to have to figure out, and maybe AI can do it. With all of its ability to process so much data, it can take all the data points and probably figure out exactly how to recreate the farsamon oil. And in any case, to finish, the Gemara says that a righteous person will be awarded with 13 Yud Gimel Naharin de farsamon, with 13 rivers of flowing of this farsamon oil. So it's also associated with the reward at the end of days. And we say, the last Mishnah in Uktzin says that every person in the end of days will merit 310 worlds. There's this idea of having shai olamot. Shai means a gift. It's actually based on a pasuk in Mishlei, in Proverbs, Le'anchil ohavai yesh, that people who love God says, people who love me, I will give them yesh. What does that mean, yesh? Like yesh, the gematria of yesh is 310. So there's a tradition that God will reward all of the righteous with 310 worlds. And shai is also 310. Shai means a gift. So a righteous person gets a gift of shai olamot. And actually going back to Bereshit, the Baal HaTurim points out, remember Bereshit means many things. And one of the things that the Baal HaTurim says about Bereshit is, it also stands for Barata Yesh, that God from the very beginning created 310 worlds for every righteous person in the end of days. And when you think about what are we going to do in the cosmic Shabbat, you have 1,000 years. What are you going to do for 1,000 years on earth? And I think one of the things that we might look forward to is to receive your 310 worlds. Quite literally, because the universe, the cosmos is so vast. Why did God make such a huge cosmos? The Gemara says, God told the people in the Gemara, God says, I made the whole world, the whole cosmos for you. All the millions of stars and planets out there, what is the use of them? Why did God make such a vast universe? God says in the Gemara, I made it for you, right? For the righteous as a reward in the end of days. So we will escape this little planet, and we will transcend, traverse the galaxy, and each person will have 310 worlds. You can take that quite literally. You don't have to take it as a spiritual thing, because it's always described as a very physical thing with rivers of oil and gold and so on. 310 worlds, shai olamot. So with the technology that's coming, it's inevitable that in the next 1,000 years, we're going to be able to traverse the stars as well and explore 310 worlds as part of the reward of the Messianic Age. So we'll end with that. May we see that day soon.